There are three types of tape we use, and it is important to not get them mixed up. White tape is the stickiest and is used on cabinets, counters, and tiles only. White tape is also cheapest, so we use it wherever possible to keep costs down. Blue tape is less sticky, so it is used on walls and wood or laminate flooring. If you use white tape on wall paint, it will rip the paint off as it comes off and could also damage the floor. Finally, green tape is the least adhesive and is used on ceilings, as ceiling paint is often weaker than wall paint. If any tape is left on for more than 2 weeks, there is a good chance it will cause damage when removed. First, we mask the floor. It's very important to keep the floor protected from both paint and other objects that could damage it. Repairing a floor is expensive and we do not want any damage. The floor paper is rolled out in strips and taped on all sides. Cut the floor paper around objects if necessary, like this. When taping the side adjacent to the cabinet itself, it's important to go right up to the cabinet. We don't want a gap on the floor where paint can get on the floor, and we also don't want any tape going up on the cabinet itself. When we spray the cabinet, if there's any tape touching the cabinet, when we remove it, we'll see a strip where the paint did not get on it. Always be as precise as possible when taping next to the cabinet. Also use the longest strips of unbroken tape as possible. Longer strips are quicker and more efficient, and the paint is also less likely to get through. This spot wasn't good enough for me, so I redid it. Continue with masking the rest of the floor. Lay the floor paper out in a logical and efficient way. If the kitchen is long and skinny, don't use lots of short pieces of paper going perpendicular to the length of the kitchen. Use few long pieces going parallel with the length of the kitchen. This saves time and tape. Again, notice that I'm using one very long length of tape, as opposed to breaking it up into shorter lengths. Next, we match the cabinets. This step is the next order of priority after the floors, as we can't make any dust until the contents of the cabinets have been covered. We use white tape for this step. First, I run the tape along the inside of the cabinet edge, with the sticky side facing out. Just like with the floors, try to do everything in one continuous piece. Make sure the tape is tucked right into the corners. We don't want a gap, as the overspray could creep its way in. Next, I fold the tape in. The corners I fold over themselves. We now have a sticky border to mask onto. We use this plastic roll to mask the cabinets. The plastic folds out to be 4 feet long. Start by using the masking machine to cut a length of plastic the width of the cabinet. Always cut to the size of the shortest side of the cabinet. So if the cabinet is wider than it is tall, do the opposite to what you are seeing here. It is very important to make sure the plastic is taut. If it is loose, it will flap around and the first coat of paint will fly off when the next coat is applied. I like to start at the top and work my way down, pulling it tight as I apply it to the tape. If there are any spots where the plastic didn't quite reach the tape, use a strip of tape to cover the gap. This is very important as overspray will work its way into any gap and coat the contents of the cabinets in paint, which we obviously do not want. Conversely, if there are any spots where the plastic went beyond the tape onto the cabinet, fold it back and tape it to itself. This is equally as important as when the project is done, any places where the cabinet was covered will show. Most of our projects are going from dark wood to white paint, so even the smallest sliver will be obvious. Trim off the excess plastic from the bottom. If you press lightly with a sharp blade, the plastic will be cut without going into the tape. Many cabinets will have shelves. This can add complications. If there is a gap, you can slide the tape in behind and use one length of tape as normal. If there is not a gap, as in this case, you will have to break the tape up to make it work. With larger cabinets such as this one, it can be more difficult to keep the plastic taut, but the same principle still applies. The place where the tape was broken over the shelf can be covered up after the plastic is on, like this. In this scenario, there is a gap between the cabinet wall and the shelf. This makes things easier as I can slide the tape in and use one continuous piece. The next step of masking is to cover the counters. We use the same paper we use for the floor to do this. Roll the paper up to length and cut it. The counters are normally made of stone, in which case we can use white tape, but in this case they are wood, so I will be using blue tape to avoid leaving a residue. We must also mask the underside of the overhang. As with the floors, be precise and make sure the tape goes right up to the cabinet without going on top of it. Next comes the backsplash and walls. This kitchen does not have backsplash, but the same principle applies. We use a small roll of masking tape to do this. Anywhere we are masking onto paint, make sure to use the blue tape. As before with the tape, always use the longest lengths of masking as possible. If it is a large kitchen, I can mask an entire 10-foot backsplash in one piece of paper. It can seem frustrating to work this way, but it is quicker in the long run, and time is money. The lack of seams also means there's a less likely chance of failure. Be sure to be precise. Again, we don't want any tape overlapping onto the cabinets, nor any gaps on the walls. It can be tempting to half-ass a spot like this where you think no one will look, but perfection is always our standard. Any section of wall or backsplash near the cabinets must be covered. The last thing we want is to find some overspray at the end of the job and have to repaint a wall or spend an hour cleaning off backsplash. Also be sure to tape any seams where the paper meets itself. Having masking flapping around while we're spraying is very frustrating. The walls are masked in the same way. A tight space like this can be frustrating, but the same standard of precision still applies. Pin the masking paper to the wall with a few pieces of tape to keep it from flapping around. The sprayer creates a lot of airflow and anything not taped down will move around. Here I'm adding another strip to ensure that no overspray gets onto the walls. If there is a tricky spot like this, it is sometimes easier to first mask it with just tape to ensure precision, then with a strip of masking paper. Masking the ceiling is often the hardest part, but also the most important, as repainting a ceiling is a lot of work. There are many different ceiling scenarios, and this one, where the cabinet goes right up against the ceiling, is one of the easiest. Make sure to use green tape on the ceilings, as the paint there is often weaker and blue tape may take it off. The same principles as masking the walls apply here. Again, try to do everything in one continuous strip. If there is a gap between the cabinet and the ceiling, you can try to tuck the tape underneath it. This also applies for walls or floors or anywhere else where there is a gap. Make sure to tape the seams. Here I am cutting the tape around this part of the cabinet that stuck out. I am now using a piece of tape to fix that spot where part of the ceiling was exposed. Again, like with the walls, pin the masking up to the ceiling so that it doesn't flap around. If the masking is applied properly, the sprayer shouldn't have to worry about getting overspray on anything. And when we remove the masking at the end of the project, all the lines should be sharp and precise.